Welcome to the Advisor Advocates Podcast. My name is Garrett Lill. I'm a certified financial planner and former advisor, and I started Advisor Advocates in this podcast to share with other advisors some of the experience that I like to say I accidentally accumulated over the course of my 13-year career, especially around the areas of the industry involving transitions from one firm to the other, advisor recruiting, M&A deals, things of that nature. Interesting thing for advisors that I've experienced in my career is that advisors are often on an island. We don't really know what's out there. We don't know what's going on outside the walls of our firm and outside the confines of our own practices. Especially when I was working in the recruiting industry and talking with advisors, there were just so many advisors who didn't know what they didn't know. So the purpose of this podcast and Advisor Advocates is to help bridge that information gap, to help advisors understand a little bit more about what the landscape looks like out there, what options are available to you, and sort of share some of the insights that I've run into and hopefully answer some of the most common questions that advisors have. As the wealth management industry continues to grow up and mature and evolve, I think there have been a couple of really interesting themes that have emerged that have sort of subtly maybe helped to maybe reshape how we define what exactly a financial advisor is and how exactly we categorize the different firms that are out there for financial advisors to work for. And it's a really interesting thing that it's in the way that it's happened, because it's not happened very suddenly at all. I mean, it's been sort of the classic definition of evolution. It's one little thing at a time that starts to reshape things. And as I have more and more conversations with advisors and learn more and more about what they're looking for as they're exploring other firms, and also more conversations with firms who are explaining to me what they're looking for, I'm starting to see sort of this redefining how we categorize firms and the roles that advisors can have. So on this show, I want to kind of talk about this a little bit and how we got here, where we are right this moment, and also kind of where I think we're heading, because a lot of the calls that I get from firms especially are probably more concerned with where we're headed than where we are today. But I also get a lot of calls from firms and advisors who don't necessarily know where we are today, because some of these things may be happening. They may be right before your eyes and you may not be seeing it. So one of the ways that I would maybe start this show is to say that 20 years ago, if you were a financial advisor, you were a financial advisor, okay? And what I mean by that is that every financial advisor that you knew had the same job. They may call themselves something a little different. One may be a stockbroker, another may be a financial planner, another may be a financial advisor. But if you're watching this or listening to this show, I think you will most likely agree that 20 years ago, if you put 100 financial advisors in the room, 95 of them at least did the exact same thing, right? They were relationship managers, they were asset gatherers, and however you wanted to slice it up, if you were a financial advisor, your job was to find people with money, find a product for them to put that money in, and you were compensated based on how much of this you did. Not saying that there weren't some exceptions to that. Nothing in this industry is 100%. I understand that. But for the most part, if you were a financial advisor 20 years ago, your job was to go find people with money and get them to invest it with you. As the industry's grown up and evolved, two things have started to subtly but drastically change the definition of that. And I think the ripple effects of that have started to have a big impact on how firms position themselves to not only to the clients and the public, but also how they position themselves to advisors in terms of their value propositions and why an advisor should join their team versus someone else. So I think that this will be an interesting show for advisors and firms to learn a little bit more about what's out there and how to position yourself a little bit more effectively from either side. If you're a firm, it may hopefully help you to better position yourself to attract the right types of advisors to your team, and maybe start that process by better defining who you are and who is the right fit for your team. And then if you're an advisor, I think it'll also help you kind of understand what you want to be as an advisor, and maybe sort of ask yourself the questions of, are you in the right environment or in the right role now? And also, are you heading towards where you want to be in 5-10 years? The first thing that I think has triggered this has been the rise of the Fiduciary Standard. And then as sort of an extension of that, a much bigger emphasis being placed on planning as opposed to product, maybe. I mean, I think at the end of the day, 10, 20 years ago, it was more about the product. How good is this investment product? How good is this mutual fund? How good is this stock picker? How good is this insurance policy? How good is this fill in the blank, whatever. But it was more product specific. At that time, if a financial advisor is a financial advisor, no matter where they're at, and it's kind of the same role, really the only defining characteristic that kind of broke the industry up was you were either on the employee side or you were an independent, right? So you would stay on the employee side if you were a great salesperson and you were great at managing relationships and finding people and closing deals and getting them to do business with you. But you tended to stay on that side if you didn't have that entrepreneurial mindset to want to go out and run a business. If you were someone who really valued having that infrastructure in place for yourself where you didn't have to go out and sign your own lease, you didn't have to go out and create your own LLC and file your own business tax returns and all this type of stuff. It was just easier for you to show up to work, do what you needed to do, go close deals, and get 40 or 50% of the revenue that you generated for your firm. Or if you were somebody who wanted to really maximize control of your destiny and go have your own shingle and have your own logo and your own website, and you really wanted to be an entrepreneur, you would start your own firm, go independent. And that was really the only way we broke the industry down. All financial advisors were financial advisors. The question was, do I work for someone else or do I go independent and do it for myself? Now it's more planning specific, and there's a bigger emphasis on the plan and the planning process. And you've started to see, this started kind of subtly, right? Like 20 years ago or 15 years ago, 10 years ago, insurance people did insurance, but they started to try to do some investment stuff. And investment people started to do some insurance stuff. And some tax people started to want to do some investment stuff. And some estate planners wanted to do some tax stuff. So you started to see just slowly at first, but then over time, the industry's figured out how to assemble most of these roles in-house so that one singular team can build an entire wealth management team where in one organization, you have investment people who focus on investments. You have insurance people who focus on insurance. You have financial planners who focus on devising financial plans. You have relationship managers who focus on managing relationships and presenting these plans and having ongoing conversations and communications with clients. Tax people who focus on taxes and estate people who focus on estate planning. And we've really tried to kind of bring as many of these different characters into one organization so that we can be sort of a one-stop shop to be able to service all client needs and to be as comprehensive as possible. The most successful of these organizations also start to, you need to have your operations people who manage the operations, and you need to have your marketing people who are good at client marketing, and then you need to have salespeople who are good at taking the leads from the marketing team's efforts and then converting them into becoming new clients of the firm. These types of teams and this type of environment tend to create more of a team-centric work environment. And what I mean by that is the compensation and the culture of these firms tends to be determined by the success of the efforts of the overall team over the individual achievements or individual efforts. Very much like a football team compared to a golfer. If you are a part of a planning team, your compensation and your success is going to be tied more to how well the overall team performs its duties. And then obviously you're going to be bonused at an individual level based on what you do and how well you do your job. But a large part of your compensation is for this type of a role is going to be a little bit more based on the team success and how well the overall organization does. The second big catalyst for change has been, I think this is mostly due to just technological advancements, but also it's just economies of scale. And for whatever reason, it is we've figured out how to run practices more cost effectively than we used to. So that has made it much easier to become independent. So you sort of have these two forces that aren't necessarily tied to each other, both happening at the same time, where there's a rise of a fiduciary standard and a planning focus that is starting to create more and more of a need for a team-based environment. And then you've also had technological advances and improvements in economy of scale that has allowed individual advisors to become independent, where they own their book of business, have access to higher payouts, are able to make more money as an independent advisor than as W-2 advisor, and they're able to do so with less risk. The compounding of these two forces has created a really interesting shift in the dynamic of how I think we define these roles. Number one, who a financial advisor is not necessarily who it was 20 years ago. You may be a financial advisor in terms of your job title, but your particular area of focus may be taxes, or it may be operations, or you may see in the team environment someone wearing multiple hats, right? A tax person may also be a planner, or an investment person may also do operations. And you start to see that in the team environment. But then you're also seeing this rise of independence. As more and more firms start to become independent and you have more and more independent options, those firms are starting to create W-2 models and planning teams. So it's no longer I'm a financial advisor and the question is just, am I an employee or am I an independent? Now it is, do I want to be a part of a team that celebrates and focuses on the achievement of each individual producer? Or do I want to be a part of an organization that is going to focus on the achievement of the overall team? And this is a kind of a big question, I think, for a lot of advisors to ask themselves sometimes, because I've talked to a lot of advisors who really thrive in that team environment. They really like focusing on the thing that they do best. They don't want to have to be a jack of all trades and run their own firm, but they would like to be independent. Or you may have someone who wants to have steady salary and benefits, but they want to really focus more on planning, or they want to focus on investments. So the way we're defining those roles is starting to shift a little bit. And then there's also, because of the advancements in technology and because of the ease of becoming independent and starting your own firms, you're also starting to see some firms that are starting to create a truly unique niche where they can do something better than anybody else, right? And they are starting to create more of a firm-centric value proposition or culture, if you will, where planning teams or individual producers can tuck in and join these organizations, and their payouts may be 20% of what they're producing, but the environment that they're in is such a growth engine that 20% of what they can produce in this environment is still more than 50% of what they can produce in an employee advisor producer role, or 90% of what they can produce as their own independent practitioner. So how we define the industry now is a little bit more, who is the franchise here, right? Who is at the end of the day, how is an organization defining success and rewarding success? Is it at the individual advisor level? Is it at the team level? Or is it at the firm level? And here's an example that even of that last category that you might not think too much about sometimes, but even the aggregators, right? The aggregators are a really weird second cousin relative of the wirehouse model, right? When you think about the transaction that takes place when an independent advisor sells their practice to join or sells into an aggregator, you take a very simple example here. Maybe a firm who is totally independent sells half of their practice to an aggregator and then receives cash up front or some combination of cash and equity into the aggregator. They're doing this because they think that the aggregator is going to be able to grow at a faster ROI than they could as an individual. And especially if they're getting equity in that deal, they're also hoping that that aggregator is going to grow at such a high clip that 10 years from now, when they sell, their equity is going to be worth 10x what it was when they bought into it. So even though they may still technically be independent in some ways and even operating in their own brand, they're also giving up so much control of their destiny that they're very similar to what you're getting when you work for a wirehouse, right? You're essentially selling into a much larger organization in the hopes that that organization is going to be more successful than you are. A lot of your wirehouse advisors are staying where they are in a wirehouse because they believe that the brand that they're working for is worth giving up half of their compensation. Even though they're 100% responsible for gathering all the assets and generating all the revenue, they're taking a 40% payout rather than going independent because they believe that the brand they're associated with is going to at least give them twice as much business as they would get on their own. And then the aggregator is really just kind of like the reverse of that transaction, right? You've got someone who already has 100% ownership and equity in what they're doing, and they're deciding to give up half of that because they think that the aggregator that they're joining is going to be twice as successful as they're going to be as an individual. And by the way, I'm not condemning or criticizing either of those two necessarily. I'm not saying that you're wrong about that. I'm just saying that it's interesting that the advisors a lot of times and the firms, that are selling into the aggregators may not be thinking about it that way, but that is a really interesting dynamic of that transaction, in that even when you break that transaction down to the cash flow, I mean, if you sell half of your book for a 4x multiple, what happens to your economics throughout that process? Well, you sell 50% of your revenue at a 4x multiple. That means you're getting 2 times your overall revenue as an upfront check. And now you're getting a 50% payout. You're getting 100% payout on half of your revenue moving forward. Okay, well, that's the same or pretty close to the economic picture of joining a wirehouse. You get 2x up front and a 50% payout, more or less. So it's really funny to me that we don't think about it that way. And this is not an original thought of mine. Somebody told me this the other day, and I thought, man, you're right. But in that scenario, you're hitching your wagon to the success of a brand over the success of the individual, where joining a team environment is allowing you to hitch your wagon to the success of the team so that you can focus on your piece of the puzzle, which may be planning, or it may be insurance, or it may be asset gathering, or it may be, any of these different roles you can have. Now, the real X factor in all of this, or the real multiplier of all this, is that these are not necessarily 1 + 1 = 2 shifts in the industry, right? Because it is so much easier to be independent, because you have a rise of importance of the team, because you have still plenty of firms out there that want to celebrate the individual achievements, and plenty of advisors out there who want to really control their own destiny, you're getting a plethora of options that can be really, really daunting for the advisor to sift through and understand, okay, at the end of the day, what's in this for me? And is this the best environment for me? And there's a lot of overlap between these, right? You may be an individual producer who is latching on to a brand-focused environment. Okay, this is really the wirehouse probably model that I'm talking about here, where you're going to be compensated based on your individual achievement, but you're banking basically that your individual achievement is going to be magnified if you are in this environment because of the brand behind you than what your individual achievement would be if you go on your own and operate on your own brand or join a different, less prestigious brand. So you can have a firm culture that is really ultimately all about the firm. The firm is the franchise. The firm is the entity that is basically driving the success, but it could attract an advisor who is going to be compensated based on their individual achievement within that environment. But make no mistake about it, at the end of the day, the number one priority there is going to be the firm. That can be a wirehouse, could technically kind of be an aggregator as well, because an aggregator is going to be sort of a similar model of that. However, you can also have a team-based environment that is still individually focused in some way, right? Because the tuck-in model, the way I define it, I'm learning that when you use a phrase in this industry, what it means is going to depend on who you're talking to, right? When I describe the tuck-in model, I'm talking about a team of independent advisors that share an office space, share a brand, work out of one location, but each individual kind of runs and operates their own individual book of business. But in those environments, a lot of times what you find are like-minded individuals in terms of what their goals are and how they see the industry. But a lot of times you'll see teams assemble themselves that may have a diverse background of expertise where they can work together and create more of a comprehensive offering for their collective clientele. And there is some sharing of the success there, but each individual contributor is still going to have control of their own destiny. On the flip side of that, you could have a completely employee-focused model where it's a salary plus bonus plus profit sharing, where each individual advisor has no actual ownership of their book of business. They're just being a team member in this type of environment, doing their job and doing it the best they can. So it does get a little bit confusing sometimes. So we're back to kind of the original, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, a financial advisor was a financial advisor. And the question was, do I want to be independent or do I want to own my own book? Now a financial advisor may not necessarily be that, but we still have the decision of, okay, do I want to be an employee or do I want to own my own book? And then we've got the added decision here, okay, I want to be an employee. Do I want to hitch my wagon to the brand, or do I want to hitch my wagon to individual achievement, or do I want to hitch my wagon to the team? Or do I want to be independent? Do I want to be independent in a brand-focused environment? Do I want to be independent in a team-focused environment, or do I want to be independent in an advisor-focused environment? So we have a lot more choices, but I still, even though I just kind of basically spent 25, 30 minutes talking about how we've made it more confusing. It actually just circles back to those two things. How much independence do you want to have in control of your own destiny versus wanting to be a member of a team and an entity that you can do your part to contributing to the growth of that team? And secondly, how much of that decision do you want to be tied to individual advisor success or brand success of the firm? And how much control do you want over your individual book ownership? So it's an interesting shift in the way things are happening there. But I know examples really of all of these combinations, right? I know of examples where you can come in as an individual producer working in an environment that the brand is supporting your individual achievement. I know of situations where you can go into a team where the brand supporting that team is going to help that team have more success, and you're going to be compensated based on the success of the team. I also know of situations where you can have individual achievement in a team environment, or you can have team success in an independent environment, and then you can have individual success in an independent environment, or various combinations of how you can sort this out. I do think it's just an interesting dynamic in the way things are going in the industry. And I talked to someone just the other day who actually they were in a very captive employee role, but they were in a great organization that was doing some really big things and allowing them to make a lot of money being a part of what they were doing. And then I know other situations where advisors may have all the control in the world, but they're not able to really exercise that because they're not in the right environment for it. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll see how post-production plays out with the editing. I'm really not sure how well I presented all of this, or if I just spent 30 minutes creating more questions for you than I did answers. But if there are any questions you have, or if there are things that I can do to help, feel free to reach out to me anytime. My phone number is in the description below. Always feel free to shoot me a text or give me a call, 919-561-2436. If you are a firm trying to figure out which direction you're heading with this and you want to help sort through it a little bit, would love to chat with you. If you're an advisor exploring your options, same goes there. Would love to chat with you confidentially, of course, and happy to have a conversation anytime. You can also email me, Garrett@theadvisoradvocates.com, or go to theadvisoradvocates.com and find a calendar link on my page under the Connect tab. We'll get you there, schedule time on my calendar for a phone call or a Zoom meeting at your convenience. And I would love to help you better understand the environment and help to answer any questions that you may have individually. I appreciate your time and listening or watching if you're on YouTube. And if I can help in any way, please give me a shout.